Yes, so when I had come back to Kuching from visiting the family in Adelaide at Christmas, I could see the writing on the wall for the project. So I had started to think about what I would do in Adelaide when the project ended, or was terminated. There was still about a year to go. My best plan was to teach English to migrants and refugees in Adelaide. This was done mainly in the TAFE colleges, as I understood. I thought I would be well equipped to perform well, and so I sent off my CV to the TAFE colleges. The response was an eye opener, and an unpleasant one at that, and a real slap in the face. They were, yes, keen to have me because of my qualifications and experience. At that time, in 2011, I had three master's degrees in education, or their equivalent anyway, plus an educational doctorate, which was really the equivalent of another master's degree, in my opinion, as I look at it anyway. Because the educational doctorate I had was not really a genuine doctorate, it was online. But it was certainly the equivalent of another master's degree. I had 30 years' experience that time teaching, most of it overseas and much of it to adult learners of English. However, there was one problem. I did not have the certificate for in workplace training and assessment. This was a government program taught in the TAFE colleges in Adelaide. Now, I had no idea at the time, but found out that it was actually, excuse me, a teacher training program designed for carpenters, plumbers, and electricians and other tradies. In other words, it was a program for tradies who wanted to teach their trade in TAFE colleges to, apprentices and so on. So there was a kind of a little mini teacher training program for tradies. So you might well ask, why did someone of my background who wanted to teach English to migrants and refugees have to have this qualification? Well, that's a very good question. And the answer was, it's the regulations. In other words, it was a way of making money for the TAFE college and giving employment to Aussie teachers on this program. And it cost $2,000, which was a significant sum of money at that time, 10 years ago. When I expressed my disbelief that I could not get a waiver for my prior knowledge, the TAFE colleges simply shrugged their shoulders and insisted that I comply with the regulations. There was nothing I could do. I waited anyway till I came back to Adelaide for my Christmas vacation. So when I came back, I signed up for this program in a local TAFE colleges. It only involved, I think, 2 weekends at a TAFE college in Adelaide and a practicum, as they pompously called it, somewhere in between the 2 weekends, a teaching practice. Unbelievable that I was being asked to do this. Anyway, I did the first weekend in Adelaide at that Christmas. However, I understood very little of what the lecturer was saying because she had invented a completely new vocabulary to discuss some very old, well-known concepts. Just as one example, instead of saying skills, they invented a new word, competencies. Oh, yeah, so this makes for a new program and everybody has to do it, and we all get money, and it suits everybody except the client, of course, the customer or the teacher. So I can honestly say, after that weekend, I still did not understand what the course was about. I had no idea. It was obviously aimed at a completely different audience from me. It was all about, tradies and things, competencies. So I was completely bamboozled. And here was me with my 3 or 4 master's degree, not able to understand it. Anyway, so either the lecturer was terrible or the content of the program was terrible. Or I suppose I was too terrible to understand it. Yeah, well, as I said, I've got 4 master's degrees, and I've done quite well in the past. So go figure. By the end of the weekend, everyone in the course, not just me, was bewildered. But I had to go back to Malaysia, and I was supposed to do in Malaysia a practicum. But when I asked about doing this, the lecturer was unable to explain to me clearly how I could do it. She just fobbed me off and told me not to worry about it. Yeah, the problem was the program was designed for carpenters and plumbers, and I was an English teacher, trainer at a university. But instead of just saying this and acknowledging it, she just waffled on and said, no worries, basically. As far as I know, at the time of making this recording, 12 years later, the Certificate 4 in Workplace Training and Assessment is still required to teach English to migrants and refugees. I have often fantasized about taking a class legal action against the Australian government for 12 years of restraint of my trade, because I was unable to work in these TAFE colleges. I could have been working in them for the last 12 years, and I'm sure I would have done a perfectly adequate job at it. I reckon that the government therefore owes me about $500,000 for loss of income during this period. Well, anyway, as it happened, I resigned from my contract in Malaysia before I even got a chance to do this practicum, whatever it was. And then to add insult to injury, as bureaucrats do, when I got to Adelaide, they wouldn't let me do the practicum in Australia. They said, oh, no, now you'll have to do the course again and pay another $2,000. Well, this was just the last straw for me, and it broke the camel's back. I decided I was not going to do this certificate again, and I decided I would do some tutoring in IELTS instead, and I did some seasonal university academic preparation programs. But it was very hit and miss, and it took me a long time to build up the IELTS business, and it was certainly not very lucrative, much less lucrative than it would have been teaching in a TAFE college. However, it was what it was, as they say. So after my resignation in Ireland, I stayed in Ireland for a while with my friend and then went back to Adelaide. My boss and the project manager in Malaysia didn't like it, of course, but I knew that the project had no future, and in the end, I had to look out for myself. I felt my big boss had been less than open with the training fellows and with me in particular. In the end, I suppose we were all in it for the money. The project continued for a few months until after my departure, but the planned second phase, unsurprisingly, never eventuated. In my opinion, the whole project was a very inefficient use of the Malaysian taxpayers' money. It need not have been. with more efficient consultation with all of the stakeholders, and with more cooperation from the Ministry of Education in the early stages, it could have been much more successful. So, as a postscript, here are some further reflections on this project. The Malaysian heads of department in the universities and the lecturers were justifiably upset that they had not been consulted during the setup phase of this project. This was the fault of both the Ministry of Education and the company. In fact, when many of us physically arrived at the university in trios of teaching fellows in January to start the project, on the first day of the year, many of the HODs complained they had not been given sufficient notice to prepare for our arrival. Imagine the reaction of an HOD at a school or university in Australia if three new, quote, experienced foreigners, unquote, turned up at short notice as, quote, consultants one day, expecting to have their workshops timetabled into the program. You can imagine the reaction. Also, the fact that many of the training fellows were not experienced teacher trainers made a bad situation worse. Many of us, although we were very experienced, many of us had been recruited at the last minute, mostly by myself, without really me having a detailed knowledge of what the program was about. In fact, as the leader of the program in the first 3 months myself, I did not know what the program was about myself. And this was because the company didn't seem to know. As I understand it, the whole project was far too political and not fully funded or supported by the Ministry of Education. And this was a major flaw. After a while, though, the local lecturers also soon realized that we, the training fellows, had not been consulted or even informed about the purpose of the project either. They could see it was the blind leading the blind. Even my boss appeared to be blind, but I think his eye was mainly on the money. Much to the credit of the local lecturers in Kuching and to the HOD, in my opinion, and in the characteristically polite and diplomatic way of Malaysians, not wanting to offend, they decided that the best solution was to tolerate us, but on the condition that we do little which interfered with their work. And this was a complex issue because the aim of the project was to update and modernize the methodology and pedagogy of the local lecturers themselves. But this fact only became clear to the lecturers a few months after the project had started. You can imagine what the lecturers thought of that when it dawned on them. Yes, they understandably felt threatened. Again, in my opinion, nothing wrong with the objective, which is to upgrade pedagogy and methodology, but many of the Malaysian lecturers were actually also more experienced than the training fellows themselves. There had been little or no preparation or training for any of the stakeholders in this project by either the ministry or the company. Well, who was to blame? Ultimately, is another matter, and this is probably not the place to go into it. Just suffice it to say that the highly politicized nature of language instruction in Malaysia and the lethargic pace of operation of the Ministry of Education didn't help. All of the training fellows were put in an absolutely intolerable situation where our professionalism was completely compromised. We were being paid and obliged to do nothing. I gave it my best shot, but 15 months was certainly enough for me.